This is the Ulefone Note 18 Ultra with 5G, and despite it being the cheapest phone I have ever used, it's actually pretty damn impressive value for the money. And today I'm going to tell you all about it and why I think, in terms of budget phones, Ulefone has something special going for it. So first, let's start with the phone itself. It's an Android device. It runs Android 13, 6.78 inches in size. Comes in black, white, or gray, but the color options are actually a little bit more unique than the names sound. They have really nice special textured backs to them. So even though this is the black version, it almost has like a blue look to it. It's really nice. They call it the petal glow finish, which I can see a little bit of when I look at this, but although there's no texture, there's no feel to it, the look is really cool. And I wish other phone manufacturers were doing this because it just makes it a little bit more unique looking than what you see on your iPhone, for example. And generally speaking, it just feels great in the hand. It has a titanium band all the way around the outside, not unlike some of the more expensive products out there. And it's easy to wield and it looks good. It has a unique feeling and a unique design to it that makes it stand out from the rest of the pack. I was absolutely floored with how much stuff comes in the box with this phone. You get a screen protector, you get an included phone case, clear phone case, you get a charging brick, charging cable. All this stuff would cost you money on most flagships these days to get. It is just really, really impressive and shows that Ulefone is really thinking about these things when they ship products for consumers. Going back to that 6.7-inch display again, it's a 90 hertz display with FHD+, and it has a peak brightness of 487 nits. 487 nits doesn't sound like a lot, but in my testing, it was more than enough, even for outdoor use. Now, behind that screen is a Dimensity 720 5G SoC and a 5,450 milliamp hour battery. In my testing, that's been close to about 2 days of normal use, 7-8 hours under load, which is pretty standard fare. I get that out of my iPhone 15 Pro Max as well, depending on how I'm using it. And overall, regardless of the price of this phone, which I'll talk about in just 1 second, it stacked up extremely well, again, to my iPhone 15 Pro Max. I put this phone head to head, side by side, with my iPhone 15 Pro Max for the better part of 2 weeks for all sorts of different testing and use cases. And after 2 weeks of doing that, that's why I think this phone has got something special going for it. So let's get into my thoughts on this phone and how it stacked up against the far more expensive iPhone 15 Pro Max. First, before we start anything, remember in the back of your head throughout this review, when I'm talking about what this phone can do, that this phone is $279.99 Canadian. An iPhone 15 Pro Max right now is about 1,500 Canadian dollars. Now, let me tell you about it, and then you'll probably start thinking, just like I am, how wild this price point is for this device. So again, as I said, screen brightness was not really an issue. I was able to put these two phones side by side outside. I had no issues whatsoever with seeing either of them in sunlight or in dim environments. Even though it's only got about half the peak brightness of the iPhone, it did just fine. The operating system, Android 13, it works very well, runs very well. It's snappy to open, quick to unlock. It has Face ID and a fingerprint reader built into the side power button. The iPhone does not have that, and the Face ID and the fingerprint ID both work very well and very quickly, and they're very easy to set up. In fact, it's actually quite a few less steps than what you would have to do on the iPhone equivalent for Face ID or the old Touch ID system if you still have those devices. I was very surprised, but also pretty happy with how quick and simple it was to set up, and they're both very reliable. They work very quickly, and they work almost every single time. And the unlock is very rapid. As soon as you touch that fingerprint reader on the side, you're immediately dropped onto the home screen. You bypass the lock screen entirely. Now, the last time I ran an Android device, it was a Google Nexus device, so that's aging my use case with these devices quite a bit. The reason the Nexus devices drew me in was because of the lack of bloatware. It was stock base Android. And this phone is actually very close to it. It's not quite the same, and it is running a slightly out-of-date version of Android because 15 is about to come out, and this phone is only running 13, but I'm sure there will be updates to come down the road. This phone just came out after all, but very, very little bloatware on here to slow the device down out of the box. Very easy to navigate, and the utilities that are included on it are mostly system management and resource management tools. So that, again, is a nice thing to see. It has 6 gigabytes of RAM built in, and again, with those software tools, you can up that to a virtual RAM total of 12 gigabytes. So 6 gigabytes physical, 6 gigabytes of on-device swap for 12 gigs of RAM total. If you want to do more resource-intensive stuff, you just have to flip into the system manager and enable that virtual RAM swap, and you get an immediate boost of speed, albeit at a little bit of a reduction of storage. However, it has micro SD capability. So even though it only ships with 256 gigs of internal storage, you can drop it a micro SD and expand up to 2 terabytes, which is a huge amount of storage. And I believe actually more than you can even option out on an iPhone 15 Pro Max currently. Pretty much everything I threw at this device in my 2 weeks of testing: CapCut, TikTok, Netflix streaming, gaming a little bit, taking photos and videos, editing them, Lightroom edits, all that stuff. I didn't feel like this device was underperforming whatsoever. And again, for that price point, it's pretty shocking because these are all brand spanking new, modern apps, editing 50 megapixel images, which we'll talk about in a second, and 1080p video, which we'll talk about in a second, with literally no problem whatsoever. Very, very impressive performance for a sub $300 smartphone. A couple other hardware things to talk about before we jump into cameras, because that's really the biggest difference between this device and I think most budget devices and your flagships. This phone also, of course, has NFC, Google Pay, and an IR blaster. So you can control your TV with this phone, which is pretty cool. I know you can do it on an iPhone if you have an Apple TV, but this can control just about any smart TV out there through the included remote control app. Very cool, and it's very easy to set up. One other nice little hardware touch on this Ulefone is it has a notification light tucked in the top right corner of the screen. You wouldn't even know it was there, and I was pretty surprised when I first saw it. But yeah, a little LED that gives you a different color status based on what's happening on the phone: red when the battery is low, green when it's charging, and blue for notifications. All right, so let's talk cameras. This is where the gap between budget phone and flagship phone really came out for me. The Ulefone is boasting a 50 megapixel wide angle, 50 megapixel main camera, and a 32 megapixel selfie camera. Those sound great on paper, but comparatively with the iPhone, they were pretty far apart still. Now, I shot primarily in the 50 megapixel normal camera mode, and I felt that the photos looked good. I'll show you a bunch of different samples comparing iPhone versus Ulefone at both at max resolution. So the iPhone shooting at 48 megapixels and the Ulefone at 50. Tit for tat, I think they're pretty darn close. If you're just using this as a still camera, you're going to probably really be happy with the quality coming out of this. The brightness and contrast are slightly different between the two. I think you're getting a slightly different, warmth to the Ulefone photos versus what the iPhone is doing for you. And I feel like smoothing is also very different, but that's mostly software processing. Aside from some variance and vibrancy between stills, I was really, really impressed with the still photos coming out of this device. And if this is what you want your phone to be able to do, and you want to get a phone that's affordable to do it, this has my vote, 100%. On the video front, video also looks pretty good. However, it can't compare against most of the other more expensive or flagship devices out there. Not by a long shot. Unfortunately, this camera system is capped at 1080p recording, as I mentioned at the start of the video. And although it looks pretty good, and if you're just putting it out on Instagram or TikTok or doing YouTube shorts, you can probably get away with it. If you want this to be a device that can record like memories, like real memories that you want to capture, you really will want something that is going to get you 4K, and this device just can't do it. Again, it still looks pretty good, but as soon as you start pixel peeping, that's when you can tell, this is a lower resolution video feed, especially if you're used to using, say, an iPhone or a more flagship device, something that's costing you a little bit more money. You can immediately tell the difference when you start to compare these two video feeds side by side. It's a little bit disappointing because on paper, it seems like it would have the capability to do it, but it can't. The mics, however, are very solid, and I would say that the audio quality being captured on this device is comparable to what you'd get on an iPhone or another flagship. So in that case, your 1080p video is going to sound really good. And just to quickly wrap up the discussion point of cameras, gotta talk about that selfie camera, because on paper, it's got a high megapixel count. However, I also found it didn't perform quite as well as the iPhone equivalent. The Ulefone Note 18 Ultra's selfie camera definitely has a wider field of view than what you're getting on the iPhones, so it can capture more of your selfie space. You can definitely fit a lot more people in your selfies for sure. However, I really felt like the selfies coming out of this camera were washed out. There was a lot of white in play, very little dynamic range and contrast. The iPhone was far punchier, had great shadows, and great color profile, great detail. The Ulefone was a little bit just more bland. You can capture a lot more with it. However, in terms of detail and dynamicism, the iPhone was definitely punching out way better quality photos. I felt like the selfie camera definitely didn't live up to the megapixel count, and it didn't hold a candle to what the back camera could do. The back 50 megapixel array is certainly way better and just offered way better capability and performance overall. So then, my final verdict on the Ulefone Note 18 Ultra. The Ulefone Note 18 Ultra is a rocket ship of a $300 device. Aside from the limitation on the camera, I was absolutely floored with how few limitations I found with this device compared to the flagship $1,500+ phone I've been using for the better part of a year. Yes, this is technically newer hardware. It just came out. The 15 Pro Max is about a year old now. In fact, the 16 is probably going to be out by the time this video comes out. But even still, this thing gives a lot of more expensive devices a run for its money, both in paper specs, true real world performance, and capability. It has 5G, a titanium frame, a very bright screen, tons of RAM and storage, can run every Android app without any problems, great performance, and an incredible 50 megapixel main camera. This thing is amazing value for the money. If you're looking for a secondary device that you don't want to break the bank with, the Ulefone Note 18 Ultra is great value and would be a great secondary device or even a great primary device if you are truly on a budget. Perfect use case I could think of right now. If your kid's looking for their first phone and you don't want to buy them a flagship iPhone that they might break in a week, a month, 6 months, this is a fantastic alternative to that. They're still going to be able to get WhatsApp and communicate with their friends and run all the apps like Instagram and TikTok, and CapCut, and do all that social media stuff that kids love to do, but at a fraction of the price. And the phone itself is not going to skip a beat. It doesn't feel out of date. It doesn't feel like it's not at the top of its game, and it doesn't feel like it's lacking in capability. That was what shocked me the most about this phone and why I truly give it the seal of approval for budget smartphone. But as always, what do you guys think about the Ulefone Note 18 Ultra? Let's have a conversation down in the comments below about this phone. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Have you never heard of it? Thank you to the team at Ulefone for sending this device over for me to test out. And we'll see you guys again soon in the next one.